Please take this opportunity to silence all pagers, cell phones, or other electronic devices. Thank you. Welcome to the George Bush Presidential Library and Museum. We are pleased you could be here today. The library is located on 90 beautiful acres on the west campus of Texas A&M University. Today, you will see the museum portion of our facility. The library or archives area of the building is not part of the public tour. The library houses more than 40 million pages of textual and audiovisual records, 1 million photographic images, and 80,000 museum artifacts. The Presidential Records Act and the Freedom of Information Act govern these documents. Our archival staff continues to make them available to scholars and researchers who are writing the history books of tomorrow. Since opening in November of 1997, the museum has hosted hundreds of thousands of visitors from all over the world, making it one of the most popular tourist attractions of the Brazos Valley. President and Mrs. Bush visit the museum often, and you never know who you might bump into while you are here on the grounds. The Bushes take a very active role in the museum's education programs, as well as the Bush School and the Ryan College Station community. At the end of the film, when the lights come up, please exit to the front of the theater. Now, we invite you to sit back, relax, and enjoy the show.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States.
I, George Herbert Walker Bush, do solemnly swear
that I will faithfully execute the office.
You are about to meet a real American hero, the 41st President of the United States. This is his story, and in a real sense, his gift to a nation and the world.
There's a myth about the Bush family. It was said that we were from the East. My mother was from St. Louis, Missouri, and my dad was from Columbus, Ohio.
George Herbert Walker Bush was born in Milton, Massachusetts, June 12, 1924. The second of 4 brothers and 1 younger sister.
When I was growing up, I guess my dad was the most important role model, and also my mother, different reasons. My father was a respected business leader, eventually a strong, respected political leader because he served in the U.S. Senate for 10 years. But he stood for something, and he believed in giving something back. And my mother was somewhat the same and somewhat different. I mean, she was a principled woman, greatly respected. She was a tremendous athlete, as was my dad. And of course, we all love sports in our family.
Even at an early age, George showed signs of leadership. He was elected president of his senior class and captain of his baseball and soccer teams.
December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy.
When Pearl Harbor came along, I was determined to go into the service. On my 18th birthday, I signed up for naval aviation. That's the youngest you could do it. You couldn't do it before you were 18. And I was a little bit scared. I was probably the youngest guy on the train that was taking us from Penn Station to Chapel Hill. And my dad put his arm around me and just wished me well. Gave me a certain sense of strength. The actual arrival in the Pacific was kind of a turning point, because we knew that we were going to be doing what so many others were doing and had done, and that is fighting for your country.
Serving aboard the USS San Jacinto, Lieutenant J.G. George Bush flew 58 combat missions. But on September 2nd, 1944, on a bombing run over the island of Chichijima, his plane was hit by anti-aircraft fire. Even with his plane severely damaged, he completed his mission before bailing out. Hours later, he was rescued by the Navy submarine, the USS Finback. Tragically, his 2 fellow crew members were lost. As the war was drawing to a close, George turned his thoughts to returning home and planning his future.
I was at a dance. It was a Christmas dance, and they exchanged dances between Rye and Greenwich.
Well, I remember going to a kind of a high school dance, and there was this beautiful girl.
And I was dancing with somebody, I don't know who, and George, I've heard, went over to a friend of mine from Rye and said, "Who is that girl? I'd like to dance with her." He introduced us, and the moment the music started, it was a waltz, and George said, "You know, I don't waltz. Do you mind if we sit down and talk?"
I don't know whether it's such a thing as love at first sight, but if so, that was probably what happened. And indeed, in January 1945, we were married. I was still 20 years old, and she was still 19. I knew I wanted to go to college, and I knew I wanted to get out of there fast. I knew I wanted to go get a job.
In just 2.5 years, George Bush pushed through Yale University, working on an economics degree, playing a little baseball, and starting a family.
That's where George W. Bush, we used to call him George or Georgie, really first came into our lives.
Oh, miles and miles of Texas.
On the advice of a family friend, the young Bush family was encouraged to go west, start their own life, and meet a new challenge. So they packed up the red Studebaker and headed to Texas.
It was a total cultural change for us, coming out of the East as we did. But I loved it from the minute we got there, and we've been Texans ever since.
Working first as an oil field supply salesman, then co-founding a small independent oil development company, George Bush was rising to this new challenge. In 1953, he helped co-found the Zapata Petroleum Company, and at the age of 30, became president of its offshore subsidiary. Robin, their second child, was born in December 1949, and Jeb in February of 1953. But only a few weeks after Jeb's birth, the young Bush family received devastating news. Robin had leukemia. She would not make it through the end of the year. Over the next few years, George W. and Jeb would be joined by Neil, Marvin, and Doro. As the Bush family grew, so did his oil company and his fledgling interest in politics.
I think Barbara and I presided over the first Republican primary ever held in Midland, Texas. I think 3 people voted all day long. Barbara and me, 2 of them, and one drunk Democrat that thought he was going to the Democratic precinct where everybody voted in those days. About 1960, I got interested in party politics mainly. Was asked to run the Houston-Harris County party, had to run for election. And it was an eye-opener. I was trying to run a business too. And that led to my being asked by the party to run for the Senate in 1964, which I did with a spectacular lack of success. And then my interest had been full-blown, so I ran for Congress in '66 and won.
After another unsuccessful bid for the Senate in 1970, President Nixon appointed George Bush ambassador to the United Nations. This was followed by other high-level appointments: chairman of the Republican National Committee, envoy to the People's Republic of China, and as director of the Central Intelligence Agency. In May of 1979, to the surprise of many, George Bush officially announced his candidacy for president. His campaign started well behind the party favorites. In fact, in early polls, he was nothing more than an asterisk, listed near the bottom of the page. But by the end of the campaign, George Bush was the only candidate besides Reagan to bring delegates to the convention.
I had not known Ronald Reagan very well. We ran against each other in '79 and '80. I lost to him in the '80 primaries. He was the nominee of the party. Out of a clear blue sky in Detroit, he called me up and said, "I want you to be vice president." And that started a friendship. I learned a lot about common decency and honor. He had a wonderful sense of humor, and I admired him enormously.
8 years as vice president only intensified George Bush's interest in pursuing the highest office in the land. While the Bush presidency oversaw extraordinary developments in the international arenas, his domestic agenda brought significant and meaningful changes to the American people. Driving his domestic policies was his belief in the principles of protecting and nurturing American families, empowering individuals, not government, to make the important choices in life. The strength of a democracy is in the people and their communities. Facing a Congress controlled by the opposition party, important legislation was nevertheless passed, and long-term gains were effected in the environment.
This year's Clean Air Act is the most significant air pollution.
Energy. Civil rights. Americans with Disabilities Act. Budgets and the economy. The banking industry. Education initiatives. American and international trade.
Tumultuous and history-making events took place during my 4 years. I'm not saying we did it, but the Cold War ended. The Soviet Union actually came apart at the seams. The Berlin Wall came down and Germany was unified. We almost signed, we negotiated the North American Free Trade Agreement. And there were big, major things happened. Well, the Gulf War, of course, was a defining moment for our country, and clearly a defining moment in my life. August 2nd, 1990, Saddam Hussein, having lied to the leaders of countries in the region, invaded Kuwait. Just 2 hours ago, Allied air forces began an attack on military targets in Iraq and Kuwait. This was the first war that they watched on television. The day the air war started, there was an amazement across the country as they saw that the smart bombs were indeed smart. When people saw with their own eyes the precision and the skill and the motivation of our forces. Kuwait is liberated. Iraq's army is defeated. It was a wonderfully unifying thing for our country, and it was very emotional as the wounds of Vietnam were healed. I think it did a lot to restore confidence, the confidence of the American people in the military, and to give our nation pride. We were a proud nation. You could just feel the patriotism back for a while.
The prospects for re-election in 1992 were very promising, but as in any contest, the outcome is never certain. Even with all the successes of the previous 4 years, there would be no second term for President George Bush.
People wonder whether there's a kind of letdown if you leave the office, particularly if you've lost an election. And the answer is we went back to our community, moved into a little house. We never felt any entitlement. We never thought we were anything other than fortunate to be able to serve there for 4 years. So there wasn't any adjustment problem. We opened a little office and had some wonderful people help us and started doing some charitable things and doing a little speaking to pay the rent, you know, and life went on.
Life did go on for George and Barbara. With family and friends, their continued efforts in a variety of public service endeavors. And of course, hobbies.
Well, it was a challenge, but it was something I always wanted to do, jump out of an airplane, perfectly good plane, I might add.
I certainly got a lot of mail saying, don't let him do it. But the truth is he wanted to do it, and he loved it. And as I told him, it was a great way to go, no matter what happened.
One way or another, this will be your last jump. I mean, could have left out one way or the other.
The 41st president has pursued his skydiving interest. In 1997, at the age of 72, on his 75th and 80th birthdays, and most recently, he surprised an audience of thousands who had gathered to celebrate the 10th anniversary of the library and museum.
Do you think parachute jumping is reckless? Is that
No.
what you're saying?
No.
I wondered.
No, parachute jumping is just heaven, though.
Another big event in their lives happened on November 6, 1997. with the dedication and opening of the George Bush Presidential Library and Museum.
I don't know if Lou Gehrig, my great idol, said it first, but I do know that he said it best. Today I feel like the luckiest person in the world. It's been everything I hoped. And a lot of my friends in the East said, why did you put your library at Texas A&M University? Why there? And I tell them, it's the spirit of the place. It's the mood on this campus. It's the Aggie spirit, which maybe a lot of people don't even know what it is of coming out of Yale University, but I love it.
For George and Barbara, family has always been a priority, and each and every summer you'll find generations of the Bush family gathering in Kennebunkport, Maine.
Grandchildren sleep all the time.
And they all bring their friends. I mean, our lunches are like Luby's cafeteria.
Sometimes they bring people we don't even know nobody knows who they are. Who's this guy? Third one down at the table. I never saw him, Gabby. We know how he got here.
Continuing the path of public service of their father and grandfather, George W. was elected governor of Texas in 1994. In 1998, Jeb was elected governor of Florida, and George W. won re-election to a second term.
We had a real sort of argument about which flag, Texas or Florida, went in order. And finally they found out protocol-wise that Florida joined the nation before Texas. So to George W.'s horror, he arrived when Jeb was there. And his flag was underneath. American flag first, Florida, and then Texas. He told me, he said, I almost got up in the middle of the night and changed the order. He didn't.
I, George Walker Bush, do solemnly swear
that I will faithfully execute.
I think it was one of the most emotional days in my life. I think probably for Barbara too. And I must confess to a few tears when he actually took the oath of office, came over and hugged his mother and dad. I mean, how close can it be? How grand can life be?
George and Barbara continue to be great examples, inspiring not only their children, but a nation as well.
Be honest, try hard, give the other guy credit, don't talk about yourself all the time, listen.
Set a good example.
Work hard, set an example. These are fundamental values that we learned from our own parents, and hopefully most families learn from theirs. Some don't have that luxury of learning from loving, caring mother and father, but we did. And then it's so easily conveyed to the next generation, to our kids. You don't lecture them, you kind of try to live those things. Faith and family and friends is what life's about.
There are many more stories to be discovered about this world leader, war hero, dedicated father, and loving husband. This library and museum is dedicated to the preservation of this important time in American history, the American presidency, and a great American, George Herbert Walker Bush.